They laughed when you were quiet. They stopped laughing when you stopped needing noise. My dear chosen ones, listen closely. This is not a coincidence, and it's not imagination. This is the moment they never planned for, the moment the people who dismissed you, doubted you, talked over you, or counted you out realized something went wrong in their calculations. They thought silence meant surrender. They thought distance meant disappearance. They thought your absence meant you were finished. And that mistake is about to cost them peace. Because here you are, not loud, not begging, not explaining, just standing there with a presence that hits like a locked door suddenly slamming shut. You didn't announce your return. You didn't send warnings. You didn't ask for permission. You just arrived upgraded. And somewhere behind closed doors, someone with serious power noticed. Not casually, not politely. They noticed the way hunters notice movement in tall grass. They noticed the way systems notice glitches. And now they can't look away. Let me say this clearly, chosen ones, because I know the question forming in your mind right now. Why me? Why now? What did I do to deserve this attention? You didn't do anything flashy. You didn't perform. You didn't posture. You survived. You endured. You adapted. You kept going while everyone else assumed you would fold. That's what scares them. Power doesn't react to noise, it reacts to inevitability. And here's the part that hits the enemy hard. They thought you were predictable. They put you in a box labeled fragile, replaceable, irrelevant, temporary. They thought you'd stay where they left you, stuck replaying old wounds, chasing old validation, shrinking yourself to fit old rooms. Instead, you did the one thing they never prepare for. You grew without their permission. Quietly, relentlessly, like pressure building underground before the ground splits open. Before we move forward, chosen ones, pause with me for a moment. If this message is hitting something real inside you, if it's putting words to a shift you've already been feeling, support this energy. Like this video and subscribe to the channel. Not for algorithms, not for trends, but so we can keep showing up with content that challenges, sharpens, and fuels you. Every like tells us this work matters. Every subscription helps us keep delivering powerful, life-changing, high-energy messages made for minds that are ready to rise. Chosen ones, your power isn't in how loud you've become. It's in how little you need to prove now. That's the shift they felt. That's the chill in the room when you walk in. That's the reason conversations stop half a second too late. Why eyes follow you when you turn away. Why smiles feel forced instead of friendly. You didn't change your outfit. You changed your gravity. And let's address another thought you might be having. If I'm so noticed, why do I still feel calm instead of dominant? Because real power doesn't feel like adrenaline. It feels like clarity. It feels like no longer explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. It feels like silence becoming heavier than arguments. You stopped performing your pain. You stopped narrating your growth. And the moment you did that, you crossed into a different category. Here's the metaphor they understand but will never say out loud. You were a file they archived and forgot about until the system flagged it again. Marked urgent, marked active, marked dangerous, because two things became impossible to ignore. First, you didn't break. Second, you didn't stay the same. That combination is rare. Most people do one or the other. They either survive and stagnate or evolve and burn out. You did neither. You endured and sharpened. You healed and recalibrated. You learned without becoming bitter, and that terrifies people who rely on others staying small. My dear chosen ones, being chosen doesn't mean being favored. It means being tested until you stop asking for approval. It means being shaped under pressure until your presence speaks before your mouth does. It means becoming the kind of person who doesn't chase rooms anymore, because rooms adjust themselves when you enter. You earned this attention the hard way, through nights no one saw, through doubts you didn't post, through battles you fought without witnesses. And the enemy? They feel it. That's why they're restless. That's why your name comes up in conversations that used to exclude you. That's why people who once ignored you suddenly have opinions about you. Fear always disguises itself as curiosity first. They don't know what you're becoming, but they know it's not safe to underestimate you again. So if you're feeling watched, don't shrink. If you're feeling seen, don't apologize. If you're feeling that strange pull forward, that quiet certainty that something has shifted, trust it. This is the stage where you stop being background noise and start being a factor. Not because you demanded it, because you earned it. Stay with me, chosen ones. This is only the opening move. And before we go any further, chosen ones, take a second and anchor this moment. If this message feels uncomfortably accurate, if it sounds like it's describing things you never told anyone, that's not random. Support this channel by liking the video and subscribing, because that's how we keep bringing you content that speaks to moments most people never experience. Drop 77 in the comments if you know someone with serious power has noticed your shift, even if they haven't said it out loud. This support keeps the signal strong. And now, let's move forward step by step, because if you're truly chosen, what comes next will feel exactly like your life unfolding in real time. Number 1. The silent upgrade that made them lose control. The silent upgrade that knocked them off balance. They slept easy when they thought you were finished. They lost sleep the moment they realized you weren't. My dear chosen ones, this is where the story truly turns. This is the moment their confidence cracked, not because you attacked, not because you announced yourself, but because you changed without permission. They were comfortable when you were struggling. They were relaxed when you were doubting yourself. They were certain when you were quiet in a way that looked like defeat. But now your quiet feels different. Now your presence doesn't ask, it arrives. Let this hit the enemy hard. You didn't become dangerous by being loud. You became dangerous by becoming undeniable. They called you insignificant because that made them feel safe. They labeled you nothing special because it allowed them to sleep at night. They reduced you to a story they could control, and for a while, they truly believed it. But here's what they didn't account for, chosen ones. Growth that happens in silence doesn't ask for approval, and upgrades forged under pressure don't come with warning labels. Regular people still see the old version of you. They interact with you using outdated information, like someone trying to open a new system with an expired password. They speak to you as if nothing has changed, as if you're still playing the same role, still carrying the same limits, still accepting the same treatment. They're stuck in the past because that's the only version of you they know how to handle. But the ones with serious power, they see it instantly. They don't need explanations. They don't need proof. They feel the shift the way engineers feel a system malfunction. Something isn't responding the way it should anymore. Something familiar stopped behaving predictably, and that's when concern turns into attention. Chosen ones, nothing unsettles powerful people more than a variable they didn't forecast. You don't fit their categories anymore. You're not readable. You're not easy to summarize. You don't react the way you used to. Their psychological shortcuts don't work on you. Their assumptions bounce off. Their strategies fail silently. You became the glitch in a system that was built to keep people like you contained. They replay old versions of you in their mind, trying to locate the exact moment the shift happened. Was it that setback, that betrayal, that quiet withdrawal, that sudden calm? They search for a single turning point because it comforts them to believe transformation happens in neat, traceable moments. But your evolution didn't work like that. It wasn't loud, it wasn't documented, it didn't happen on a stage. It happened internally, privately, slowly, in places they never had access to. And that's what scares them. Power hates surprises. power survives by predicting threats before they form. But you didn't rise on schedule. You didn't follow the expected arc. You didn't collapse when the pressure increased. You didn't break when the weight became unfair. You survived storms that erased others. You healed wounds that should have limited you. You got back up after situations designed to humble you permanently. And you did it without witnesses, applause, or reassurance. Chosen ones, that kind of growth cannot be diagnosed, downgraded, or dismissed. That's why they're studying you now. That's why your name circulates quietly in rooms you've never entered. That's why you show up on their radar as something unfamiliar, something strong, something that doesn't fit the model. And this is where the two things they noticed come into focus. First, your resilience. Not the motivational kind, the unsettling kind. The kind that makes them question how you're still standing after everything that was thrown at you. Hits that would have ended, most people didn't end you. They refined you. You didn't just survive, you recalibrated. You came back sharper, calmer, more precise. Your recovery speed doesn't make sense to them. They can't measure it, replicate it, or interfere with it. That alone disrupts their confidence. Second, your clarity. That shift in your eyes, that absence of confusion, that refusal to entertain nonsense. You stopped feeding energy into draining conversations. You stopped negotiating your boundaries. You stopped chasing approval. You walk into situations now with a steady calm that makes people unsure how to approach you. You're not wandering anymore. You're not guessing. You're choosing. And that terrifies people who built their position on the assumption that you would always stay unsure of yourself. Ask yourself, chosen ones, why do certain people act strange around you now? Why do conversations feel slightly off? Why do they look at you longer than necessary? Why does your silence feel louder than their words? It's because your presence exposes them. Your growth reflects what they avoided. Your evolution highlights where they stagnated, and nothing is more uncomfortable than being reminded of what you tried to bury. They're not reacting to who you were, they're reacting to who you're becoming, and they hate that they didn't prepare for this version of you. They hate that the person they once dismissed now requires monitoring. They hate that unpredictability has entered the equation, because unpredictability is power, and you carry it now. What unsettles them most is that they can't identify the trigger. They dig through your past, searching for a switch, a moment, a flaw they can point to. But there isn't one. Your upgrade wasn't for attention, it wasn't for applause, it wasn't for validation. It was survival, it was adaptation, it was transformation under pressure. So when you feel eyes on you, don't shrink, don't doubt yourself, don't explain. Someone with serious power noticed what you've become, not because you tried to be seen, but because you could no longer be ignored. You are no longer background noise. You are no longer small. You are the upgrade they didn't predict, and deep down, they know this is only the beginning. Number 2, the part of you they realized was never small. They saw what you've been holding back. They laughed at your limits because they never realized you were still loading. My dear chosen ones, this is where their attention sharpened. This is where curiosity turned into concern. They didn't notice you because of what you showed the world. They noticed you because of what you were restraining. Not the polished version, not the socially acceptable version, not the softened version you used to survive. They saw the unexpressed force behind your restraint. The capacity you kept folded inward so you wouldn't intimidate fragile egos or disturb comfortable mediocrity. You thought you were being low-key. You thought staying quiet meant staying invisible. You thought keeping your head down kept you safe. But people with serious power don't study surfaces. They study range. They don't ask, who is this person today? They ask, how far could this person go if nothing stopped them? And when they looked at you, chosen ones, they didn't see someone still figuring it out. They saw a system running far below its maximum output. They saw unused bandwidth. They saw a loaded engine idling. Here's what hit them hard. Most people peak early. They reach a level that feels comfortable and call it their ceiling. Imagine a device designed for full performance, but never charged past 20%. That's the average trajectory. People stop expanding the moment effort stops being praised. They stop evolving when resistance appears. They confuse comfort with completion. But you never settled, even when life stopped clapping, even when nobody noticed, even when growth felt lonely. You kept expanding quietly, steadily, stubbornly. That's what triggered the alarm. Your trajectory didn't flatten the way theirs did. It didn't stabilize. It spiked. It rose in a way that couldn't be neatly graphed or predicted. Capacity like that is unsettling to anyone who's already decided they're done growing. And the ones with real power don't look at who you are now. They look at who you're becoming next. Your future version entered their awareness before you fully recognized it yourself. And that version is far more disruptive than your present one. Chosen ones, they saw the giant hiding inside the calm. They saw the force inside the restraint. They saw that the version of you walking into rooms today is not the final form. Everyone else sees you healing, rebuilding, recalibrating, but someone influential sees the silhouette behind you, larger and sharper, moving faster than expected. They see someone who could outthink them, outgrow them, outperform them in ways that don't ask for permission. You might be asking yourself right now, why would someone powerful even care about me? Because capacity reveals trajectory, and trajectory reveals threat. They notice the gap between who you are and who you could become. That gap is enormous, and most people don't have it. They are already operating at their ceiling. You are not. You're still climbing, still unlocking, still expanding into rooms you haven't even entered yet. Picture someone watching a crack form in concrete and instantly knowing roots are pushing through from below. That's what happened. Your growth was underground for a long time, silent, unseen. But roots don't ask permission when they break surfaces. They push through anyway. And now your capacity has crossed into visibility. Whether you wanted attention or not, it arrived. Your silence wasn't weakness. It was incubation. Your isolation wasn't punishment. It was preparation. Every setback wasn't an ending. It was recalibration. Your strength wasn't shaped in praise or safety. It was engineered under pressure. Betrayal, disappointment, loneliness, humiliation, and long stretches of being misunderstood forged something most people never develop. That's why your capacity feels different. It wasn't borrowed, it was built. Imagine a weapon being forged in secrecy while everyone else sleeps. Heated, hammered, reshaped again and again. No audience, no applause, just repetition and pressure. That's you, chosen ones. The world didn't see the forging, but the results are starting to show. And people who understand power can sense when someone shifts from merely surviving to actively ascending. That's why they're watching now. Not with admiration, but with assessment. They're trying to decide what you'll become in relation to them. Ally, disruptor, asset, problem. But one thing is already decided. You can't be ignored anymore. You've crossed into a tier of capacity that gets monitored. Here's the part they'll never say out loud. When they look at your potential, they see their own limits reflected back at them. Your growth reminds them of what they stopped pursuing. Your fire reminds them of what they let die. Your resilience highlights the version of themselves they abandoned for comfort. People don't fear what they understand. They fear what exposes them. So don't shrink. Don't doubt why the attention arrived. Don't question your worth. You weren't noticed by accident. You were noticed because you crossed a threshold most people never reach. And this was only the first thing they saw. The second one is where the pressure really begins. Number 3, the moment you were no longer ignorable, marked on the radar before you even realized it. They ignored you when you were quiet. They panicked when they realized you were changing. Chosen ones, this is the part they'll never admit out loud. They didn't suddenly notice you because you got louder, flashier, or more visible. They noticed you because something in you stopped deteriorating and started adapting. For years, you were background noise to them, a non-factor. Someone easy to overlook, easy to underestimate, easy to assume would stay exactly where they were placed. But the moment they realized you weren't fading, you were mutating, the entire tone shifted. You've been evolving in silence, chosen ones. No applause, no reassurance, no validation, no safety net. Just pressure, resistance, and long stretches where it felt like you were building something no one would ever acknowledge. You thought nobody saw it. You thought your transformation was happening off the grid, below the surface, unnoticed and unrecorded. That assumption was comforting. It made the isolation feel purposeful, but it wasn't accurate. Real power doesn't wait for introductions. It doesn't need announcements or explanations. It doesn't require you to step into a spotlight. It operates through detection, not attention, through patterns, not praise, through systems you don't see and metrics you didn't know existed. You didn't slip under the radar, you triggered it. Imagine a system designed to detect irregular movement suddenly lighting up when everything else is stable. Imagine indicators spiking where there shouldn't be activity. That's what happened when your growth crossed a certain threshold. Something about your pace didn't match normal timelines. Something about your resilience didn't align with expected outcomes. Something about your recovery didn't follow the usual curve. And that's when the label changed. You stopped being viewed as someone just trying to get through life. You were reclassified, quietly, precisely, without ceremony. Suddenly, you weren't noise. You were a variable, a rising one, an unpredictable one, someone whose trajectory couldn't be smoothed into averages or dismissed as luck. Everything about you started getting observed differently. Your silence wasn't ignored anymore. It was analyzed. Your pauses weren't assumed to be weakness. They were interpreted as calculation. Your comebacks weren't seen as coincidence. They were flagged as patterns. Chosen ones, this is where many people misunderstand what happened. It wasn't just your potential that caught attention. Plenty of people have potential. Plenty of people talk about dreams, post about ambition, and imagine futures that never arrive. Potential without direction is harmless. It burns out. It collapses under pressure. It fades the moment things get difficult. That kind of potential doesn't worry anyone. What stopped them cold wasn't just what you could become. It was the fact that you were becoming it on purpose. They saw that your growth wasn't random. It wasn't chaotic. It wasn't reactive. It had direction. You weren't drifting anymore. You were steering. You weren't hoping things would work out. You were choosing, adjusting, refining, cutting away what didn't serve you. That combination, raw capacity paired with deliberate direction, is what transforms someone from overlooked to monitored. And maybe this question is sitting heavy in your mind right now. Why me? Why am I being watched now? Because you're no longer the same person you were last year, last month, or even last week. Your internal operating system changed. Your tolerance dropped. Your focus sharpened. Your decisions became cleaner. And those shifts don't stay invisible forever. Evolution scares people who stayed the same too long, especially when it happens without permission. They study you the way analysts study emerging phenomena, not with admiration, with caution, with curiosity sharpened by concern. They watch how you handle pressure, how you respond to setbacks, how quickly you recalibrate, how little you waste energy on distractions now. They're trying to determine whether you're going to stabilize or keep accelerating. Here's the part that hits hardest for the enemy. They don't know how to stop this because they don't know what caused it. They can't pinpoint a moment to undo. There's no single event to sabotage. No obvious weakness to exploit. Your evolution wasn't sparked by praise or support. It was forged in resistance, and anything built that way doesn't crumble easily. Chosen ones, you weren't flagged because you're dangerous today. You were flagged because of what your trajectory suggests tomorrow, because every indication points to growth that hasn't peaked yet, because you're still adapting, still refining, still escalating, and deep down they know this isn't the end of your shift. It's the early signal. You're not being watched because you asked for attention. You're being watched because you became impossible to ignore. Number 4. When your awareness turned you into a problem. The day you stopped looking through them and started seeing through everything. They weren't threatened by your struggle. They panicked the moment you understood it. My dear chosen ones, listen carefully, because this is the pivot point. This is where curiosity turned into concern. This is where casual observation became active monitoring. They were never afraid of you when you were searching, doubting, second-guessing yourself, or trying to make sense of a world that kept feeding you half-truths. Lost people are easy to manage. Confused people are easy to steer. Uncertain people are easy to exhaust. But the moment you started seeing clearly, the moment your eyes changed, everything shifted. What they noticed wasn't confidence. It wasn't attitude. It wasn't rebellion. It was awareness, the real kind. Not the trendy language people repeat online, not the surface-level self-help vocabulary. What emerged in you was the kind of awareness that strips illusions down to their wiring, the kind that turns a regular person into a variable the system can't predict or contain, the kind that makes power structures uneasy because it can't be uninstalled once it's activated. Chosen ones, the danger wasn't that you asked questions. It was that you stopped accepting answers that didn't make sense. You saw that most systems run on appearances, not substance. You saw that authority often survives through repetition, not merit. You saw that narratives aren't discovered. They're designed, rehearsed, and enforced. You saw that silence can be a tool, not a weakness. And worst of all for them, you realized you were being watched, and you didn't flinch. That's the exact moment you crossed a line they hoped you never would. For a long time, they were comfortable watching you stumble. They saw you doubt your instincts, absorb blame that wasn't yours, and wear roles that never fit. You were predictable then. You reacted when pushed. You explained yourself when misunderstood. You stayed longer than you should have. You tolerated things that drained you. You were visible but contained, and that made you manageable. Then something snapped, not loudly, not dramatically, but decisively. Your mind sharpened, your energy shifted, your movements became intentional. Your silence stopped being empty and started being deliberate. You began walking like someone who understands the hidden rules, the unspoken incentives, the quiet games being played behind friendly faces and professional language. You weren't angry, you weren't bitter, you were awake. And they saw it in your eyes. Chosen ones, awareness changes posture. It changes timing. It changes what you respond to and what you let pass. You stopped reacting emotionally to bait. You stopped falling for manufactured urgency. You stopped explaining your boundaries to people committed to crossing them. You began reading between lines instead of swallowing words at face value. You detached from people you once clung to out of loneliness. You stopped chasing validation that never satisfied you anyway. You walked away from distractions without announcing your exit. And this is the part they couldn't fake their way through. Awareness changes your entire energy signature. It alters how you move through space. It disrupts your old patterns. It makes your decisions harder to anticipate. It turns you into someone who can't be easily guided, guilted, flattered, or pressured. Powerful people sense that instantly, the same way experienced players recognize when someone else understands the game. You might be wondering, chosen ones, how could they tell? I didn't say anything. That's exactly how. Awareness doesn't need to speak. It shows up in restraint, in timing, in the way you pause before responding, in the way you no longer over-explain, in the way you choose not to engage. Once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. And once they see that you see it, they can't treat you the same way again. You stopped following scripts designed for people who don't question outcomes. You stopped absorbing narratives meant to keep you distracted. You stopped mistaking noise for importance. You woke up fully, and they witnessed it happen in real time. That's why their attention intensified. That's why their behavior shifted. That's why the room feels different now when you enter. An aware chosen one is dangerous, not because they want control, but because they can't be controlled the old way. You're no longer blind. You're no longer drifting. You're no longer useful in the role they expected you to play. You see leverage where others see chaos. You see patterns where others see coincidence. You see intent where others hear excuses. And awareness like that doesn't just threaten individuals, it destabilizes systems built on people staying unaware. So if you've noticed people watching you differently, speaking more carefully around you, or treating you like something unpredictable, understand this: they're not reacting to your words, they're reacting to your sight. You became someone who sees too much to be managed casually, and now they can't look away. Number 5. Why your calm presence feels like a threat. Why your calm unnerves them more than any threat ever could. They know how to shut down noise. What they don't know how to handle is silence that understands the game. My dear chosen ones, this is the part they never prepared for. They were ready for resistance. They were ready for rebellion. They were ready for anger, for loud defiance, for emotional reactions they could label, provoke, and suppress. What they were not ready for was you, quiet, clear, and fully aware. That's why you terrify them without ever raising your voice. Here's the truth they don't want you to realize. Strength alone doesn't scare systems. Capability alone doesn't disrupt power. Even growth by itself can be managed, redirected, exploited. But awareness changes everything. And when awareness pairs with capacity, it creates something that doesn't fit into their control models at all. Someone with capacity but no awareness is useful, predictable, easy to plug into someone else's agenda. Give them a cause and they'll fight. Give them a leader and they'll follow. Give them an enemy and they'll exhaust themselves chasing it. They look powerful, but they're controlled. Their batteries waiting to be drained. That kind of strength doesn't worry anyone at the top. But you, chosen ones, are different. You see the cage. You recognize the distractions. You notice the psychological pressure, the emotional hooks, the subtle manipulation disguised as opportunity, and more importantly, you don't panic when you see it. You don't explode. You don't announce it. You simply stop playing along. And that's where the fear begins. You don't fall for illusions anymore. You don't swallow bait just because it's shiny. You don't let people weaponize your empathy or guilt you into loyalty. You don't spend energy defending your name to people committed to misunderstanding you. You move like someone who understands how power actually works, not how it pretends to work. And here's the question that's probably crossed your mind, chosen ones. If I'm such a threat, why don't I feel dangerous? Because truly dangerous people don't feel aggressive. They feel clear, they feel calm, they feel uninterested in nonsense, they feel done explaining, they feel focused. That stillness you carry now, that's not emptiness, that's control. The quieter you become, the louder their internal alarms get. Imagine 3 people in a room. One is shouting, one is panicking, one is arguing, and then there's you, sitting there, watching, listening, not reacting. Who do you think everyone subconsciously tracks? Not the loud ones, not the emotional ones. It's the one who doesn't need to announce themselves, the one who doesn't leak intention, the one who isn't desperate to be seen. Loud rebels are loud because they're scared. Quiet ones are quiet because they're certain. And you, chosen ones, move with certainty now. You don't flex awareness for attention. You use it. You don't argue with people who want reactions. You sidestep them. You don't expose your plans. You execute them. You don't explain your boundaries. You enforce them with behavior. That's what separates you. That's what elevates you. That's what unsettles them. You stopped reacting and started responding. You stopped clinging and started releasing. You stopped chasing and started attracting. You stopped outsourcing your judgment and started trusting your own mind. And systems built on distraction, noise, and emotional manipulation cannot function around someone like that. Because you're not here to obey. You're not here to rebel loudly. You're not here to perform heroics for applause. You're here to move reality quietly, efficiently, and without warning. That's why they can't categorize you. That's why they can't recruit you. That's why they can't ignore you. You don't fit the role of follower or enemy. You don't behave like a tool or a liability. You operate like someone who understands leverage, timing, and restraint. Chosen ones, silence with awareness is not weakness. It's the most advanced form of power there is. And deep down, they know it. That's why they watch you more closely now. That's why they second-guess their moves around you. That's why they feel uneasy, even when you say nothing at all. You didn't terrify them by trying. You terrified them by understanding. And once someone understands the game and still has the strength to play it differently, there's no system in the world that can keep them small for long. Number 6. The strategy behind your sudden silence. The calm before the ground gives way. Noise is for those who want attention. Silence is for those who are about to change everything. Chosen ones, this is the phase that truly unsettles them. Not when you argued, not when you explained, not when you tried to be understood. The moment that shook the ground beneath their confidence was the moment you stopped talking. Because silence, real silence, only comes after understanding. And they know it. Nothing alarms an enemy more than realizing you no longer feel the need to respond. They've been watching this shift closely, that deliberate quiet settling over you like a storm that refuses to announce itself. No warnings, no signals, no emotional leaks, just stillness. The kind that makes people uneasy because it doesn't come from confusion. It comes from control. You stopped explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You stopped defending choices that no longer require approval. You stopped broadcasting your thoughts to anyone who didn't earn access to them. Chosen ones, there was a time when you overshared because you were searching for safety. You opened your mind because you hoped someone would protect what you revealed. You spoke because you believed clarity would save you. But experience taught you something sharper. Not everyone listening is qualified to hear you. Not everyone smiling is safe. Not everyone asking questions deserves answers. So you locked the doors. You guarded the blueprints. You began moving like someone who finally understands the value of information. Imagine a chessboard. One player talks through every move, explaining strategy, revealing intention, announcing confidence. The other says nothing, no reaction, no commentary, just quiet calculation, 10 steps ahead. You already know who wins. Silence doesn't mean you're losing, it means you're thinking faster than they can follow. This is what they're reacting to now. Your silence isn't fear, it isn't retreat, it isn't confusion, it's restraint, it's strategy, it's power under control. You're allowing people to believe you're still the old version because their underestimation works in your favor. It keeps them predictable, it keeps them careless, it keeps them blind. And blindness is expensive when the ground is about to shift. Chosen ones, they see how you let others think they're smarter than you. How you nod while mentally mapping their intentions. How you listen without revealing your position. How you watch patterns instead of reacting to provocation. This isn't accidental awareness. This is learned precision. You didn't stumble into this state. You earned it through mistakes, consequences, and realizations that changed how you move. That's why their systems lit up. Because people who grow loudly are easy to track, easy to label, easy to manage. They announce every breakthrough, narrate every emotion, document every thought. But those who evolve quietly, those who absorb information while revealing nothing, those who walk with calm faces and loaded minds, they can't be mapped, they can't be rushed, they can't be baited. Picture a volcano that stops rumbling. No smoke, no tremors, no warning signs, just silence. That silence doesn't reassure anyone. It terrifies them. Because it means pressure is building. It means something is forming. It means energy is being stored instead of released. That's what you've become, chosen ones, the quiet before the eruption. You're not hiding, you're loading, you're not shrinking, you're sharpening, you're not avoiding conflict. You're choosing it on your terms. You're giving nothing away. And that nothingness is exactly what they can't handle. They can measure noise. They can decode chaos. They can predict panic. But they can't track someone who sees everything and says nothing. This is where people start projecting onto you. They fill your silence with their own fears. They imagine intentions you never stated. They guess at moves you haven't revealed. Your quiet becomes a mirror, and what they see reflected back isn't flattering. That's why they're restless. That's why they keep watching. That's why they can't look away. You're not silent because you're unsure. You're silent because you're preparing. You're conserving energy. You're letting others expose themselves while you stay unreadable. You've learned that every word is a signal, and every signal can be intercepted. So you speak less and observe more. You move slower and think deeper. You stopped reacting and started positioning. Chosen ones, this is the stage where real leverage is built. When you no longer need to convince. When you no longer need to explain. When you no longer need to announce your evolution. The uncertainty of what comes next frightens them more than any threat ever could. Because uncertainty means they no longer control the narrative. And that's the art you've mastered. Going quiet right before the ground shifts. Number 7. When observation replaced dismissal. When the watchers become the ones watching their backs. They were comfortable pulling strings until they realized the strings weren't attached anymore. My dear chosen ones, this is the phase they never trained for. This is the point where the balance quietly flips, not with noise, not with confrontation, but with a subtle shift so clean it takes them time to even realize they've lost the upper hand. For a long time, they expected you to react on cue. They expected explanations when questioned, apologies when pressured, emotional responses when provoked. They expected you to shrink, to justify yourself, to dance to rhythms they set. That expectation gave them comfort. That expectation gave them control. But now, something has changed. You stopped responding the way they planned for. You stopped moving when they pulled. You stopped feeding the system that depended on your predictability. And the moment that happened, chosen ones, the hunters started tracking you, not because you attacked, but because you slipped out of reach. This is where everything turns. They're no longer directing the energy. They're studying it. They're no longer setting the pace. They're trying to keep up. They're the ones checking your movements like uneasy guards staring at security footage that no longer follows the script. They replay interactions with you, scanning for clues, wondering when control slipped through their fingers. They analyze your silence, your presence, your pace, your sudden calm. The power dynamic didn't explode. It inverted, quietly, cleanly, without permission. And that realization eats at them. Imagine a system built on buttons and responses. Press this, get that reaction. Say this, trigger that emotion. Apply pressure, receive compliance. That's how they operated. That's how they stayed comfortable. Now imagine the moment one piece stops responding. The button is pressed, but nothing happens. No reaction, no explanation, no emotional payoff. The system doesn't just stall, it panics. Because systems aren't afraid of resistance, they're afraid of independence. Chosen ones, control only works on people who don't realize they have options. The moment you stopped reacting automatically, you stepped outside their reach. You didn't announce it, you didn't argue, you didn't rebel loudly. You simply stopped being manageable, and that single shift changed everything. Now your presence alone alters environments. You don't need to assert yourself. You don't need to push for space. The air adjusts when you enter. People feel you before they fully register why. Voices soften, tones shift, behaviors recalibrate. Some become cautious, some become curious, some become uncomfortable. Not because you're doing anything dramatic, but because you're no longer operating through familiar channels. And you might be asking yourself, chosen ones, why does this bother them so much? I'm just minding my business. Exactly. That's the problem for them. You're no longer emotionally predictable. You're no longer psychologically accessible through old tools like guilt, fear, flattery, or pressure. You don't move when they tug old strings because those strings don't exist anymore. You cut them quietly, without confrontation, without explanation. Picture this metaphor carefully. A lion they assumed was sedated suddenly stands up, not roaring, not attacking, just awake. Clear eyes, calm breath, steady posture. That's you. You're not threatening, you're not posturing, you're simply aware. And nothing unsettles established power structures more than an aware, self-directed individual who doesn't need permission to move. You became the variable they didn't account for. The equation was built assuming you would always respond the same way. When you didn't, the entire structure had to be reconsidered. Now, when they look at you, they see two futures, and both keep them uneasy. In one, you evolve into an ally with influence that can't be ignored. In the other, you become a force that could dismantle what they rely on. Either way, you're no longer invisible. Either way, you matter. Chosen ones understand this clearly. You didn't steal power from anyone. You didn't overthrow anything. You didn't challenge the system head-on. You outgrew it. And growth is far more destabilizing than rebellion because it doesn't announce itself. It doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't wait for approval. This is why the hunters are watching now. Not to attack, not to confront, but to understand what they're dealing with, because you didn't just change your position on the board, you changed the rules of the game. And once that happens, everyone who benefited from the old rules has no choice but to pay attention. You didn't just shift the power, chosen ones. You became the shift. Number 9. The evidence they can't explain or dismiss. Chosen ones, this is the part they will never admit, not even in private. You didn't chase attention. You didn't posture. You didn't angle yourself to be seen. You were busy repairing damage no one helped you clean up. You were rebuilding parts of yourself that were cracked in silence. You were growing the way people grow when survival leaves no other option. And yet, somehow, your progress became impossible to ignore. Not because you demanded recognition, but because your growth speed broke their tools. Here's what rattled them. They tried to chart you. They tried to map your evolution the way they map everything else. Timelines, phases, predictable arcs, cause and effect. But every time they thought they understood your direction, you shifted. Every time they thought they had your pattern locked in, you jumped ahead. Every time they predicted your next move, you changed pace entirely. It wasn't chaos. It was something worse for them. It was real evolution. You weren't trying to be mysterious. You weren't hiding. You simply outgrew their frameworks faster than they could update them. And chosen ones, that's when alarms go off. Systems don't panic when someone improves slowly. They panic when growth stops following expected math. when progress stops being linear, when someone leaps instead of climbs. That's what you did. While others were inching forward, you were recalibrating internally, breaking old versions of yourself overnight, shedding identities that once defined you without ceremony. Most people grow in straight lines, safe lines, comfortable lines, but you don't. Your evolution spirals, it accelerates, pauses, then surges without warning. It responds to pressure, not permission. It follows rhythms no one else hears. And that's why they can't quantify you. You don't match their templates. You don't fit personality profiles, emotional forecasts, or behavioral predictions. They try to reduce you to data points, past experiences, labels, and explanations, and every time they think they've cracked the code, you've already rewritten it. Chosen ones, you're not outgrowing boxes, you're dissolving them. You're too fluid to measure, too complex to categorize, too fast to predict, and that deeply unsettles any system built on certainty. You might wonder why this bothers them so much. Why not let you evolve in peace? Because predictability is the foundation of control, certainty is the currency of power, patterns are how systems manage people, and you broke all three without ever trying to. You became a moving target in a world that only knows how to manage fixed profiles. You became a shifting equation in a structure that demands stable inputs. You became living proof that complexity can't always be simplified or contained. Imagine a scientist trying to measure a storm that refuses to hold its shape. One moment it's calm, the next it's violent, then still again, then lightning from nowhere. That's what watching you feels like to them. Not because you're reckless, but because you're alive. You're not unpredictable on purpose. You're unpredictable because you're authentic. Real growth doesn't ask permission. Real growth doesn't stay tidy. Real growth doesn't pause to reassure observers. And that's why they can't stop watching. Every upgrade you make forces them to redraw the map. Every shift you undergo stretches their understanding past its limits. You don't just improve, you redefine what improvement looks like. Chosen ones, this is important. The attention you're receiving isn't admiration, it's assessment. They're not watching because they're impressed. They're watching because they're unsure. Unsure how far you'll go. Unsure what version of you will emerge next. Unsure whether you'll align, disrupt, or bypass their structures entirely. You challenge their formulas simply by existing the way you do now. And here's the truth that should ground you instead of inflate you. You didn't become this by chasing power. You became this by refusing to stay broken, by choosing growth over stagnation, by healing in places no one applauded, by evolving when it would have been easier to stay familiar. That's why your growth feels threatening. It wasn't manufactured, it wasn't controlled, it wasn't supervised. The craziest part, chosen ones, is this: you're still early. What they're struggling to measure now is only the beginning of your trajectory. If your current evolution already broke their charts, imagine what happens next. And that's why they can't look away. Not because you demanded attention, but because your becoming rewrote the rules of what they thought was possible. And now, chosen ones, bring this full circle. If everything you've heard feels uncomfortably familiar, it's because you're living it, not imagining it. Someone with serious power noticed your shift, and once that kind of attention locks in, there's no going back to being invisible. If this message resonated, support this work by liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and sharing it with someone who needs clarity right now. Drop 77 in the comments if you recognize these signs in your own life. Stay focused, stay grounded, and keep moving forward. This is only the beginning.